There were actually some attempts in the ancient world, or ideas in the ancient world, of marking people to show loyalty to a particular deity. There's a story about this, a fictitious story in 3rd Maccabees, about Ptolemy IV Philopator, who branded Jews, or wanted to brand Jews, with an ivy leaf, which was the symbol of Dionysus. The background for this, though, is especially in the Old Testament. In chapter 7 and verse 3, we have an allusion to the mark on the righteous in Ezekiel chapter 9, verses 4 through 6. That's where God marks the righteous so they will be protected when the judgment comes. Well, you have that in chapter 7. Now we have the contrast of that in chapter 13, the mark of the beast. You either have the mark of the lamb or you have the mark of the beast. And this mark was on the righteous to protect them. As we said before, you've got that in Psalms of Solomon 15. You have some other Old Testament allusions to things like that. God puts a mark on Cain to protect him. But in Psalms of Solomon 15, the difference is you have a mark on the righteous. You also have a mark on the wicked. And here we have a mark on the wicked. But again, these are both symbolic marks that only God and the angels saw in all the background texts, and therefore probably in this text too. It's not a literal mark that's put on people so much as it is a sign of loyalty to the kingdom of the beast. And people who are afraid of getting killed or being cut off economically, they go ahead and take the mark. They go ahead and blend in to the values of the world system. The number of the beast's name, well, what could that be? There have been various views through history. Luther thought it was the Pope thought it was Luther. Some people today have said it's the 9-digit Social Security number. Mentioned in the introduction how some people have joked that it was Barney the dinosaur. You can make any name come out to this, including mine, if you make up the rules as you go. But symbolic numbers were standard back then, and we find that a lot of times in ancient literature. So people would pay attention to the symbolic dimensions of the number. 666 is a triangular number. It's actually a doubly triangular number. Now, the way you get triangular numbers, I used to play with this when I was 9. If you take square blocks, you want to keep it square, you have to have the same number on the bottom and on the side. So you've got 4, you've got 9 with a base of 3, and 3 on the side, and so on. Well, triangular numbers are what happens when you try to build it as a triangle instead of a square, an equilateral triangle. And so if you have 8 on the bottom, then the total number of elements or squares that you have in the whole composition would be 36. If you have 36 in the bottom, the entire number of blocks you would have would be 666. So it's a doubly triangular number. There are only 4 doubly triangular numbers between 100 and 1,000. So that might be significant. It's also about 2/3 of 1,000. You can play other math games with it. 6 could be a parody of 7. I actually think that's probably the most likely background for it. This was proposed by Irenaeus in the late 2nd century. It implies evil. Jesus calculated in numerical values comes out to 888. So it could be a parody on that. When it says calculate the number of the name, it means do gematria. Gematria was a Jewish practice, although it wasn't limited to Jews, but the name gematria is especially a Jewish name, where you calculate the number of a name. You take the numerical value of all the letters in the name. So, for example, later rabbis would do this in Genesis 14 when Abram goes to rescue his nephew Lot. They said, well, all these men that he had with him, he really didn't have all this army with him. All he had was Eliezer of Damascus, his servant, with him. It was the 2 of them single-handedly who beat the enemies because they calculated the number of Eliezer's name, and it came out to the same number as the number of people who were supposedly with him in Genesis 14. Sometimes they could get very fanciful with this. But each letter had a numerical value. So in Greek, for example, you don't speak of 1 Peter, you speak of Petru Alpha. You don't speak of 2 Peter, you speak of Petru Beta. Alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet, stood for the numeral 1. They didn't have separate numerals besides that in Greek. And the same in Hebrew. Aleph stood for 1. Beit, the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, stood for 2. Gimel, the third letter, stood for 3, and so on. Well, interestingly enough, people were playing on the name of Nero. They said Nero Caesar. They calculated it out in Greek letters, what that would come out to. And the phrase, he murdered his mother, which incidentally he had, also comes out to the same numerical value. So you find this in bathroom graffiti around the Roman Empire. Nero Caesar is his name, killed his mother. It is the same. But if you spell Nero Caesar in Hebrew letters, it comes out to 666. Is that a coincidence? It was standard in Jewish prophecy tradition to take rulers as numbers, often based on the first letters of their name. Most commentators here think that this is a reference to Nero. Now, there are some objections to this. One is that it only works in Hebrew letters and Revelation is written in Greek. It's true, but Revelation also presupposes the knowledge of some Hebrew wordplays, like with Abaddon in chapter 9 and verse 11, or with Harmageddon in 16:16. Also, another early document, Third Barak, calculates Greek words in Hebrew letters. And probably many already knew the answer to the riddle. But there's another objection, and that is, hey, there's 2 ways to spell Nero Caesar in Hebrew. And so how do you know that this is the right way to spell it? Well, yeah, the other way to spell it is found in later rabbinic documents where Nero Caesar comes out to 616 instead of 666. But the early spelling that's been found on a document from the Judean desert from this period actually spells it in a way that comes out to 666. And interestingly enough, in a later period when scribes were copying the book of Revelation, some wrote it down not as 666, but as 616, as if they knew the answer to the riddle, but thought it was misspelled or miscalculated. Something else is of interest, and it may suggest a double wordplay in his name, just like you have with the phrase mother killer in Greek. Beast is therion in Greek, but if you spell that Greek word in Hebrew letters, the numerical value is 666. And of the beast, if you spell that in Hebrew letters, it comes out to 616. But something more important theologically than the exact meaning of the number of the name is this. Chapter 13, the final closing paragraph, talks about those who receive the mark of the beast. But chapter 14, and there were no chapter breaks in the original, immediately opens up with speaking about the 144,000 with the Lamb on Mount Zion, and what was written on them was the name of the Lamb. There's a contrast between the glorious fate of God's martyrs and the damned who took the mark. And the point is, you've got to serve somebody. Choose this day whom you will serve, the beast or the Lamb.